5 Exocet missiles almost won Argentina the Falklands War. France had sold Argentina exactly 5 that could be launched from a jet Edda 1 for each of its first 5 Super Étendard strike planes, and on the 4th of May 1982, a single one of them found the Royal Navy destroyer HMS Sheffield. 20 men were killed. It was the first British warship lost in action since the Second World War. The Royal Navy had no reliable defence against a missile that flew a few feet above the waves, and Argentina was trying to buy more. What followed was a hidden war. 4 secret operations fought over a handful of missiles. A black market manhunt across 2 continents, a betrayal by the company that built the weapon, a suicide raid onto enemy soil, and a covert American resupply the world was never supposed to see. This is the war for the Exocet. To understand the panic, you have to understand the missile. The Exocet was French-built, radar-guided, and it flew barely above the sea, a sea skimmer, almost impossible to spot until the last seconds. Because it rode so low, ship's radar often could not see it until they cleared the horizon, leaving the crew seconds, not minutes, to react. Against a target that small and that fast, the Royal Navy's defences were close to useless. The air launch version had to be carried by a specific jet, the Super Étendard, and Argentina had received only 5 of them, with only 4 fit to fly. When Argentina seized the Falklands on the 2nd of April, Britain sent a task force 8,000 miles south into the range of those jets. On the 4th of May, 2 Argentine jets came in low over the sea. A single Exocet slammed into HMS Sheffield. For years the accepted story was that the warhead never even exploded, that unspent rocket fuel started the fire that killed her. A later Ministry of Defence review reversed that. The warhead detonated. Either way, the result was the same. The most modern destroyer in the fleet was gutted by fire, and she foundered under tow 6 days later. 3 weeks later, they did it again. On the 25th of May, 2 more Exocets slammed into the Atlantic conveyor, a converted container ship carrying the task force's heavy lift helicopters. 12 men died, including her master, Captain Ian North, who went into the freezing water helping his crew off and never came out. He was decorated for it after his death. And with the ship went 6 Wessex and 3 Chinook helicopters, the aircraft meant to carry the troops to Port Stanley. Only a single Chinook survived. Now the soldiers would have to cross the island on foot. A brutal, days-long march, the troops themselves called the Yomp. 2 ships, 2 attacks, and Britain's whole campaign was suddenly hostage to how many of those missiles were left. And whether Argentina could get its hands on more. The answer to the first question was almost none. By the 30th of May, every air-launched Exocet Argentina owned had been fired, but the fear it left behind never lifted. Weeks later, with their air-launched missiles gone, the Argentines pried an Exocet off one of their own warships, bolted it to a trailer on the shore, and used it to hit yet another British ship, HMS Glamorgan. Even jury-rigged, the missile could still kill. The answer to the second question is where the secret war begins. The moment the fighting started, 2 hunts began at once. Argentina was hunting for more Exocets, and British intelligence was hunting to make sure it never found any. The documented heart of that hunt runs through Peru. Argentine officers arranged, through a Peruvian Air Force general, to buy 12 Exocets, nominally for Peru, but really destined for themselves. $12 million deal, codenamed Celeste y Blanco, sky blue and white, the colours of the Argentine flag. When London learned that France might sell Exocets to Peru, Margaret Thatcher personally pressed the French president to block the sale, terrified the missiles would simply be handed on to Argentina. The deal collapsed. On a technicality, France demanded full payment on shipment, not on delivery, and Argentina surrendered before the money could clear. Around that documented core swirl the spy stories. Accounts of the operation describe British agents fanning out across Europe, posing as arms dealers to buy up every loose Exocet on the market, and running stings to send Argentine buyers chasing missiles that did not exist, including one dealer said to have dangled 30 Phantom Exocets in Hamburg. How much of that is true, and how much is legend, no one can fully prove. The files stay closed, but the shape of it is real. Somewhere in the back rooms of the arms trade, the Falklands War was being fought with money and lies, not just ships. And the one country that could settle it all was the country that had built the missile in the first place. France made the Exocet. France sold it to Argentina, and when the war came, France quietly turned on its own customer. At the outbreak of fighting, France embargoed arms to Argentina, suspended the remaining Super Étendard and Exocet deliveries it still owed, and opened its files to London, handing Britain technical intelligence on the very weapons it had sold Buenos Aires, the Exocet's radar signature, its weaknesses, how to jam it. British experts believe the missiles even carried a hidden kill switch. The missile's maker denied any such thing existed. That dispute has never been fully settled, so treat it as an open question, not a fact. But here is the other hand. Even as the French state was helping Britain, reports say a small French technical team, around 9 men, stayed on in Argentina through the war, helping fit and test the Super Étendard and its missiles, keeping the very weapon working that was sinking British ships. So France was on both sides of its own weapon, betraying its customer in public and quietly propping it up in private, in a war decided by 5 missiles. The maker played every angle at once. If you cannot stop the missiles at the market, and you cannot switch them off, there is one option left. You destroy them where they sit. The Exocets and their jets lived at one base, Rio Grande, on the Argentine mainland, in Tierra del Fuego. The plan was called Operation Mikado. 55 men of the SAS would be flown in 20 Hercules transports and land directly on the enemy runway to destroy the missiles, the aircraft, and the pilots who flew them. It was, in plain terms, a one-way trip. Experienced SAS men judged it a death sentence, flying unarmoured transports onto a defended airfield hundreds of miles behind the lines. Resistance built. A sergeant handed in his resignation rather than go, and the squadron commander was relieved and replaced. Only the scouting mission ever flew. On the night of the 17th of May, a stripped-down Sea King helicopter lifted an 8-man team off HMS Invincible to slip into Argentina and watch the base before the main raid. Almost nothing went right. Fog forced them down miles from the target. Believing they had been spotted, the team asked to be dropped near the Chilean border and slipped away on foot. No intelligence was ever gathered. And the helicopter became the icon of the whole affair. The crew flew it across the border into Chile, tried to sink it, then set it on fire, and blew it up on a beach near Punta Arenas, where Chilean authorities found the burnt-out wreck, and, eventually, the crew. Mikado itself was cancelled. Years later, the British government admitted there was a strong likelihood it would have failed. The most dangerous mission of the war is remembered for a raid that never happened. Through all of it, one country stood publicly on the sidelines and secretly tipped the scales. In public, America was neutral. Its Secretary of State, Alexander Haig, shuttled between London and Buenos Aires, playing the honest broker. In private, the President had already made his choice. Ronald Reagan told his defense secretary, in as many words, give Maggie everything she needs to get on with it. So while Haig talks peace, the Pentagon armed Britain. America shipped roughly 100 of its newish Sidewinder missiles, the AIM-9L, able to lock on head-on instead of only from behind. Thatcher herself later credited that missile, supplied by Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, as decisive in the air war. Argentine pilots had trained to dodge the old Sidewinders. Against the new ones, they died in head-on passes they had been taught were safe. America also handed Britain its mid-Atlantic staging base at Ascension Island, and quietly prepared to loan the Royal Navy an entire warship, the assault ship USS Iwo Jima, if Britain lost one of its 2 carriers. And that was only the visible part. Reports credit the Americans with fuel, satellite intelligence, and communication support as well a whole quiet resupply running underneath the public talk of neutrality. So look again at what the Falklands really was. The world watched a clean fight between 2 nations over a set of cold, windswept islands. What it did not see was a war underneath. British spies buying missiles off the black market, the French secretly betraying the weapon they had sold, the SAS handed a mission they called suicide, and the Americans arming one side while pretending to referee. 5 missiles, 4 secret wars, and a public story that was never the real one. Because the most important battles of the Falklands were never fought in the South Atlantic at all. They were fought in back rooms, on other continents, over a handful of French missiles. And almost no one was ever meant to know.